Monsters. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Murder News podcast, which also serves as a weekly meeting for our very own true crime cult.
But not to worry, you've landed in the cult with all the sing-alongs and none of the sarin gas. We just like to imagine hanging out with all of our spooky friends, braiding each other's hair like Wednesday Addams, and sharing stories about the subject that brought us all together, murder.
If you don't know us already, I'm Angelina, and I'm here with my freaky friend, Aurora. How was your week?
It's on the up and up. I'm feeling mostly recovered from COVID. I survived.
We did it. Yeah. Look at that.
How about it? So I'm good.
So a major achievement for the past 2 years.
Yeah, it is a big achievement. And it's interesting because since the whole lockdown situation started, I've not felt like cooking. And I saw everybody making their banana breads and their sourdoughs and all these amazing things. And I was like, I will just be ordering food delivery online. I will never cook again.
I feel the same. I've stopped making food.
Well, the past couple of days, I have been trying to make the perfect cupcake because it's just not something that I can find in Hungary. And I just made the most amazing cupcakes I have ever made in my entire life. The buttercream icing, all vegan, but oh my gosh, they're so good and moist and chocolatey and they rose and they look beautiful and they taste amazing. And I'm so proud of them.
That's amazing. We have to note here that Aurora is actually an incredible baker. She had a food blog for a long time. I've been to plenty of events at her house pre-COVID with amazing food and snacks. So
thank you.
I know you know how to make the tastiest donuts and all of this. So you now that you're back in the mood, you'll be enjoying some good treats, I guess, which is great.
Yeah, I hope so. I'll have to send you some because I'm very proud of these.
I wish it was easier to mail baked goods that distance. I feel like they wouldn't survive, but that's one thing I'm really looking forward to about being able to get back together one day. But in the meantime, I've kind of picked it up a little bit too. I've not been much for cooking this whole pandemic, but I did make donuts the other day, which were decent. And
I saw the photos; they looked very good.
And I also made biscuits and sausage gravy. I love Southern food the most. Well, nearly the most. There's a sort of three-way tie between Southern food and Mexican food and
Mexican food's my favorite.
Probably Korean food are my favorites.
Korean food is awesome. I'm gonna have a those rice rolls. I forget what they're called. For dinner. The soft chewy rice cakes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nice. That's awesome.
So, of course, just because you're here listening to us today, we already consider you to be honorary monsters, complete with cupcakes and donuts and anything else just for coming and hanging out with us. But if you want to make it official, you can join the MMN commune on Patreon. Just head over to patreon.com/murdernews. And for just a few bucks a month, you'll have a baby goat named in your honor. You'll get a cool title like Grandmaster of Goats. We'll send you a little bit of murder merch, and you'll have exclusive access to our Patreon-only special video episodes.
Now, before we dig in, let's take a look at some of the true crime stories making headlines this week. Last Saturday, January 15th, an 11-hour standoff took place at the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. The rabbi, Charlie Citron Walker, and 3 congregants were taken hostage by a British man named Malik Faisal Akram. The standoff ended as the rabbi threw a chair at Akram, allowing the group to escape. The assailant, who was ultimately killed in gunfire, was already under investigation by a couple of police organizations, and it's not clear how he was able to obtain a visa to come to the U.S. from the UK.
This week, a Tennessee woman was exonerated after spending 27 years in prison for a crime she did not commit. Joyce Watkins, now 74 years old, was convicted of sexually assaulting and murdering her 4-year-old great-niece, Brandy, back in 1987. The child's injuries have now been determined to be caused by a playground mishap, and the case is now closed. Watkins' partner, Charlie Dunn, who was also convicted, unfortunately passed away in prison before he could be released. As you probably know by now, we have signed on with the Darkcast Podcast Network, which is nothing but dark and spooky shows. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our favorite Darkcast podcasts.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. I'm CJ, host of Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBT. My episodes focus on crimes committed by and against the LGBTQ community. I've covered cases you probably have heard of, such as Matthew Shepard, Brandon Tina, and the Orlando Pulse nightclub massacre, as well as some lesser-known cases like the murder of Ray Hainish, the Australian gay beat murders, and the suspicious disappearance of Lisa Lynn Stone. I cover cases brought to me by listeners like Penny Brummer, who I believe was wrongfully convicted, taboo cases such as lesbian corrective rape and murder in South Africa, and Pray the Gay Away camps. I discuss gay serial killers, women who pretend to be men to hook up with other women, and trans murders. I'm opinionated and uncensored. I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but surely I'm someone's shot at tequila. No matter what your gender or orientation in life might be, please join me as I tackle rainbow crimes in search of unicorn justice. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.
And we're back.
Now, before we get into our story, we just want to say that while our tone is light in the intro, we do take the topics we're discussing very seriously. We are best buds and we love chatting together every week and turning it into a podcast. We want to share that passion with you and to create a vibe where all of you feel like our best buds too. We joke about us friends forming a cult or commune, but that's not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, which we do occasionally talk about in our weekly stories. We feel it's important to open up and talk about even the darkest aspects of humanity and the downright scary things that come up in the news. But we want to make it clear that our intention is never to sensationalize, and we always try to deliver these stories with respect to all parties involved or affected by the crimes we discuss.
We always post our sources in the episode description, so you can do some digging on your own if a story we present piques your interest. But you should know that if you ever feel we get it wrong, either in our tone or in the details of the case, we want to hear about it. We are more than happy to make a correction or give an update on a case we've discussed in previous episodes. So feel free to reach out to us at murdermurdernews@gmail.com.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include spousal abuse, drugs, and a mention of suicide. If any of those are particularly sensitive subjects for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
We've turned away from our usual stories about events from this past week in true crime history to take a look at a case that needs more eyes and ears on it.
Sisters Breana and Brittany Noojin grew up in Hayden, Alabama. Hayden is a very small town in Blount County with a population of about 1,300. With no other siblings, Brittany and Breana were always very close. Rarely did a day go by without the two hanging out or at least talking, even as they grew into adults and had separate homes and busy lives. That's why when 32-year-old Breana Noojin Nix was found dead in her home on March 2nd, 2020, Brittany knew better than anyone to suspect foul play. Breana's husband, Steven Nix, had called 911 to report that his wife had taken her own life. But according to Brittany, this is not only incredibly out of character for her sister, but her manner of death simply didn't make sense.
Nearly 2 years after her sister's death, Brittany is still fighting for justice for Breana, urging local law enforcement and media to pay attention. Brittany met with so many dead ends. Local media hasn't reported a thing on Breana's case, and a Google search pulls up exactly 0 news results. Not to be defeated, Brittany has taken to social media to appeal to the podcast community at large to help bring attention to her sister's story. Brittany reached out to us in hopes that we could help spread news of her sister's case and maybe even appeal to someone out there listening who can do more to help. Before we make you mad about the details of this case, let's hear a bit more about Breana, who really sounds like someone who could bring a smile to anyone's face.
She was always the quiet one. She was real shy. I was the one that always did the talking for her. She loved music. She was always listening to music, and she was real big into Netflix and all that stuff. Not when we were kids, but later on. But for the most part, we were only 2.5 years apart. So we were really close. We fought over clothes and was able to share clothes, just girl stuff. Breana and I actually grew up living in Hayden for most of our lives and went to school and graduated there.
Breana met Steven Nix through high school friends at a lake party at a friend's cabin.
They met and hit it off, and that was actually her first boyfriend relationship that she had ever had in her whole life. So she was in love.
Breana and Steven got married in 2011, so they were approaching their 10-year anniversary, which would have been this past November. Breana's family didn't love Steven, but Breana was such a gem in their lives that she was worth it, so they endured him.
There are not many people that have anything good to say about him. Even prior to my sister's death, he's very hard to tolerate. You can only be around him for a certain amount of time because he talks so much, and he brags. He loves to one up everybody. If you tell a story, he's going to say that he's been there, done that. And he's always he brags. He loves to brag.
Breana knew how her family felt, and she generally didn't share it with her family when she and Steven were in an argument because she didn't want to give them any more reason to dislike him. Though she was normally very warm and open, she kept her relationship with Steven very private. Breana kept the little things to herself, but when things got to be too much, she knew her sister would be there for her.
A few years before she passed, I had a house of my own about an hour from where she was living, and she came over one day and was telling me how she wasn't happy. She felt stuck. I tried to tell her, I know people that work at the hospital here. I can get you a job. We've got an extra bedroom. I would love for you to come live with me, but she never would.
It sounded to Brittany like Steven was very controlling, and although Breana may have wanted to leave, she didn't feel like she could.
Even some of her coworkers had told me after she had passed that he would come to her job asking her for money and embarrassing her in front of everybody. And that wasn't, just a one-time thing. It was a regular thing. And so, of course, her coworkers didn't think highly of him either. Someone had left a tip saying that Breana was using a burner phone to contact a divorce attorney because he was so controlling, and he kept up with their phone records. He kept up with any mail that came to their mailbox. He kept her location. He was very controlling. So I could totally see her going and buying a burner phone to contact a divorce attorney, especially if she didn't want him finding out about it.
For about 2 weeks prior to Breana's death, she hadn't been in touch with her sister. This was unusual because, as we mentioned, they usually saw each other almost every day, but Breana could have been busy. She worked at a hospital as a registered nurse, and she was passionate about her job.
She just started this new job 6 months prior to her death. She was making a lot more money than she was at her last job, and she was also working the night shift, so she was making like $4 extra an hour just working that shift. So she was doing really good on money. She would come to my house sometimes, like if she lost a patient, she would be pretty upset and be crying, saying, I lost a patient, and she did everything she could to help them. So you could tell that she was concerned about her patients. She cared about them, and she would get attached to them, and she loved to help people. Normally, I would tell her to come over, and she would, say, "Oh, I've got to do laundry or something." But I would say, "I can wait." I would end up making her feel bad enough to where if you don't come see me, I'm gonna be mad at you. Just come on, do that stuff later. But yeah, those 2 weeks, she would always have an excuse, like her head was hurting or she was just too tired and couldn't. And normally I could still talk her into coming over and hanging out, but those 2 weeks, That last day that I texted her, she didn't even respond to my text. I asked her what she was doing that Sunday, and she never even responded. So it kills me to try to think about what she could have been going through.
Breana got off work around 8 a.m. on March 2nd, 2020, and usually after working an overnight shift, she would come home and go to bed. Rather than in bed, Steven Nix said he found his wife unresponsive in the bathroom around noon, and that between the time Breana got home and the time he found her, he was out running errands and dropping garbage off at the dump.
He got caught in a lie the first few questions that he was asked. They asked him, what time does Breana normally get home? And he said around 8 a.m. And they said, well, where were you when she got home? And he said, well, I was asleep, so I don't know exactly what time she got home. And then they noticed that she had a missed call on her phone at 7:53 from her husband. So they mentioned that. And he said, oh, well, I must have woke up and forgot that I called her and went back to sleep. I don't know. But then he knew that I was standing right there when I heard him, get caught in that lie. And once they left, they were there for hours after I had left. But once they had left, it was probably around 7:30 that night. He called me and said, hey, I know I said that I didn't know what time I was really awake. I was just pretending like I was asleep because I was going to trick her or something, kind of making up for, he knew that I was sitting right there when they caught him in that lie. So he was just trying to cover, I guess.
When he got home, he said he noticed that the bathroom door was locked and that the light was on, but there was no answer when he knocked on the door. So he picked the lock with his fingernail and pushed the door hard to get inside because Breana's body was leaning up against the door. Inside, Steven says he found a needle in the sink, evidence of drug use. He suggested that maybe she had a secret drug habit no one was aware of.
A lot of addicts that I have talked to have told me, or former addicts, have told me that when you shoot up something that is that strong, you don't have time. If you're passing out, you don't have time to take the needle out and put it in a sink, especially if you're falling down against the door. You're not going to have time to take it out and put it in the sink. And with an 18-gauge needle, having other needles of various sizes throughout the home after the husband had led me to all this other evidence that the police didn't find. She had access to different size needles. She was a nurse. She would have known. It even says on the package of the needle that it's not to be used to inject with. And she would have known that. I did go to the funeral home 2 days afterwards, and I did see her whole body. And I was in shock because I was told that there weren't any marks on her body other than a little bit of blood on her arm where she had injected a needle, and then a couple of drops of blood in the sink. So I was under the impression that that's all that was on her. Well, when I get to the funeral home, her body's covered, and her feet, every mark on her feet was all the same color. They were all the exact same color, all appeared to have been done that day. There was nothing in between her toes. And I've always heard that when people are, shooting up and trying to hide a secret addiction, that's the first place that they normally start injecting because nobody notices that. And she had worked a 12-hour shift that night before she died. So with her feet in that condition, I just do not see how. It would have been extremely painful to be on your feet for 12 hours with her feet in that type of condition. Several people think that she was tortured just from the marks on her body.
Plus, Brittany says Breana was a whiz with needles when it came to doing blood tests or setting up IVs in the hospital. She could quickly and painlessly get the job done without leaving a mark behind. So it seems out of place for Breana to have done such a bad job of administering drugs to herself and to leave so many bruises.
There was 2 empty vials found in her spare bedroom drawer by the husband 2 days after her death. So that was another red flag. If someone has a secret addiction, why would they keep 2 empty vials? Breana was extremely smart. even if she were to have a secret addiction, she would have been smart enough to know to dispose of those vials if she didn't want anybody knowing about her addiction.
When Steven found Breana, he first called his uncle, a deputy at the local police department, who was about a 30-minute drive away. Next, he called his parents, who were about a 10-minute drive away. And then he called 911. Brittany says the DA played the 911 call for her and that Steven didn't sound genuinely concerned, nor did he sound like he was trying to revive Breana while the 911 operator tried to walk him through the steps of CPR.
They did try to talk him through the steps of CPR, but you couldn't hear him counting. You couldn't hear him doing compressions. You couldn't hear any of that.
Steven's uncle and parents were there before the first responders arrived, which is curious because, according to records, it was only 2 minutes between the time the call to 911 was placed and the time that the first responders arrived.
He was only on the phone for 2 minutes. He called at 12:12 and they got there at 12:14. I don't think that the family members should have been in the house at all. I don't think the uncle should have been allowed in the house just because that's a conflict of interest. So yeah, from day one, I don't think that nothing was done properly.
If this sounds pretty unbelievable to you, maybe that's because you don't live in a small town like Hayden. In Hayden, everyone knows everyone. Brittany and Breana loved growing up around that small town sense of community. Of course, there's a downside to the small town vibe.
You know everybody's business. That's just how it is there.
And when your conflict is with a relative of a local police officer, unprofessional is only the beginning.
Anybody that lives there and is aware of the authorities there, they'll all tell you it's a good old boy system. Just in Blount County, since we have gone public with this, we've had at least a dozen people reach out to us telling us that they have, the same similar situation going on. And when they try to contact the district attorney, they get threatened with harassment if they call and check on their loved ones' cases.
We had read that a police officer had been removed from the case and thought surely that was Steven's uncle being removed because of a conflict of interest. But nope, Brittany explained it was another member of the team.
That was the original investigator that was removed from the case and the sheriff's department. We don't know why. And I personally, just my opinion, I think that she was removed because she was doing her job and trying to get to the bottom of it. The husband's uncle, who is a deputy for the sheriff's department, was there working the scene that day in uniform, but he wasn't on the time of arrival sheet with all of the other first responders. So it's all just, I feel like I know that he had the lead investigator pretty much intimidated and was reluctant to ask Steven any, serious questions because his uncle's standing right there hovering over her the whole time, going back and forth to pretty much wherever she was going. He was just kind of following her and watching over everybody. And she really didn't feel comfortable asking Steven any questions. And then he had his parents on both sides of him the entire time. It didn't matter where he went. Both of his parents were right there and kind of helping him answer questions and stuff like that.
So those were the first major red flags, but Brittany Noojin brought so many more to our attention. Like Steven's demeanor while the police were on the scene.
He did not shed a tear. He was even laughing minutes after they pronounced her dead, joking about how, I went to Hayden, you're not going to be able to read my handwriting. So I had to write the statement for him. But the fact that he could even laugh about anything at that time, it really bothered me. Like, you just lost your everything. That was your spouse, the person you've been with for over 10 years. The person that provides for you, does everything for you, and you're laughing about your handwriting not being legible. And he had just lost his best friend 6 months prior to losing Breana, and he stayed in bed for a week crying. I mean, so I know that he knows how to show emotion.
But also, the whole crime scene investigation is a red flag. Brittany says the police left the scene with some stones unturned, planning to come back and finish the job. But they didn't seal off the crime scene, and Steven and his family were allowed to hang around at the house. And although one cop keeping watch was advised to stop anyone from manipulating potential evidence, it doesn't sound like he was really on top of things.
Steven was more concerned about taking that garbage out than he was them working on his wife. And this was a very small bathroom. So 10, 15 people being in there already, it was already extremely crowded. And he's getting in their way, keeping them from being able to do their jobs because he's more concerned about taking this garbage out. Well, they take the garbage out, put it in a tall kitchen bag from their garbage in the kitchen, which is another weird thing because why do you have a full bag of garbage when you just got back from the dump? So they're taking this garbage and putting it in the back of his truck. And the investigator asked if she could search his truck and her car. And he said, I don't care if you search her car, but I don't want you searching my truck. So she did have to leave and go get a search warrant. It took about an hour. And when she got back, she did notice that the truck and garbage bag had been moved after she had instructed the other officers to not let that happen.
And what happened to the evidence investigators brought back from the crime scene?
The evidence that was obtained from her home that day never even made it to an stored properly. This bag of garbage sat in an office at the sheriff's department for over 15 months. And anyone in the world could have touched it, contaminated it, destroyed anything. So nothing was handled properly.
Brittany says Breana and Steven had been arguing over text all night as Breana worked her last shift at the hospital. The text messages showed that Breana was upset because Steven had rekindled his affair with a woman he had been seeing the last time Breana wanted to break up with him. This time, Breana had been looking into divorce, and records of calls to divorce lawyers were on her phone as well. This sounds like plenty of evidence for investigators to have to at least suspect Steven and bring him in for questioning.
Well, there was, but they said that since her phone was never stored properly, it has lost all data on it now. After they took her phone, they still have her phone, but he went right after that to the phone store and had her phone deactivated and had her number transferred over to a little burner phone that he had. Yeah, so now if you call her phone, he'll answer it.
That's not good. Also not good is the fact that the story Steven told about Breana's manner of death is full of holes. There was a needle in the sink at the time Breana was found, and the death certificate reads death by accidental overdose. When Brittany got a chance to see her sister's body at the funeral home, it was covered in bruises, supposedly self-inflicted while injecting drugs. But just 2 weeks prior, Breana came over to her sister Brittany's house in just shorts and a tank top, and she had no bruises at the time. It seems odd to imagine that Breana injected that many times in just 2 weeks, particularly because Brittany is sure her sister has no history of drug use.
She wouldn't even drink alcohol. If she did, it would be on special occasions like New Year's or something, and she might have 1 or 2 drinks, and that's it. She would never drink. She was prescribed to prescription pain pills at one point a while back because she had pancreatic problems, and I watched her take one, and she couldn't tolerate it. She would get really sick. It would give her headaches, make her real nauseous. I mean, she would be vomiting from one pill, so...
If we're supposed to believe that Breana had a secret drug habit, how could she have skipped right past cigarettes, alcohol, and marijuana and jumped right into fentanyl, a drug more powerful than heroin?
The toxicologist report, there was no marijuana, no nicotine, nothing. She didn't do. She was an angel. I mean, she was a very good girl.
And the fentanyl vials that were found on the scene were actually discovered days after the initial crime scene investigation. Where did they appear from, I wonder, and why were they not found when Breana's bathroom was searched the first time? And did anybody stop to think about how Breana could have gotten hold of fentanyl? Yes, she was a nurse, but acquiring fentanyl at work is a little more complicated than you might realize.
She did work in the SICU, so yes, she did have access to fentanyl vials, but you do have to have someone witnessed you pull the drug and witnessed you dispose it. So it wouldn't have just been her job on the line. It would have been someone else's. And I don't think any other nurse would run their career to help support someone else's addiction if they were trying to steal any kind of medication. Not one person from the hospital that she works at recognizes them, or did recognize them. They actually showed me what their vials look like and said, I've never seen vials like that.
The fact that Steven's story of what happened to Breana is so obviously false should be an indication to investigators that he needs to be questioned and explored as a suspect. Another indication would be the old adage that still circulates in true crime circles, quote, "It's always the husband." Gut feelings aside, there are plenty of reasons to suspect Steven Nix. First, let's explore whether he had a motive. We know Breana and Steven didn't have a perfect marriage.
He would always talk down on her in front of all of us, and he never praised her, talked about how proud of her he was. You know, he just talked bad about her all the time.
And we know that Steven had been having an affair on a couple of separate occasions with the same woman. That same woman is Steven's current live-in girlfriend.
It definitely gives him motive, and the fact that he had another woman come into his home before we even had Breana's funeral, it makes us think that he is capable of doing something like that.
And let's talk about this house. Whose house is it? And who was footing the bill while Breana and Steven lived there together?
The house wasn't even in her name. It was only in his name. So she probably felt like if she were to leave, all of that equity would just go to him, and she would be stuck. She wouldn't have anything. And I think that's the reason why she did stay with him for so long. He never worked. Breana supported both of them, paid all of the bills, bought his vehicle, bought her vehicle, paid their mortgage on their house. He hasn't had a job in the past 7 years doing anything.
It might sound like it wouldn't be worth it for Steven Nix to kill his wife just for the equity she had built up in their home, particularly if he planned to continue living there, as he would need to continue paying the mortgage and bills somehow on his own or with the help of his new girlfriend. We don't know her situation, so we can't speak to that. But then we heard that Breana had taken out life insurance and had recently doubled the value of that life insurance policy. Even though money was tight for the couple, Breana consistently paid into that life insurance.
I think he was just that manipulative and controlling that he talked her into doing that, because they were already struggling with money. They had just filed bankruptcy that year that she started her job. So why pay extra from your check, even if it was just a little bit here and there? But why pay extra when you're 32 years old, you're healthy, no children? It makes no sense. He had to have been the one to persuade her to do that. As soon as he got the death certificate, he collected $160,000. He was even trying to contact her, the hospital, and get her week's vacation paid in advance before he even had the death certificate. I mean, that's the first thing he asked the investigator when they pronounced her dead. If this is considered suicide, am I still going to get that life insurance money? I've got to have that. I'll lose everything if I don't have that money. And that he's more concerned about money when he just lost his wife.
So that covers the why, but what about the how? Is there any way Steven could have gotten his hands on enough fentanyl to kill his wife? As Brittany mentioned, Steven Nix was often out of work or between jobs and was never a big earner. But when he did work, he sometimes picked up shifts as a hospital janitor. Steven's new girlfriend has also worked in a hospital in an administrative position. We already explored Breana's history with drug use, which sounds like it's pretty much non-existent. But what about Steven?
She was prescribed to ADHD medication, and she would have to keep that on her at all times because he would steal it from her. But I do know that he was addicted to ADHD medication and was purchasing prescription pills off the street. And like Breana had said, was stealing it from her as well. So he does have connections to purchasing drugs off the street. I don't know if whoever he gets them from would have access to fentanyl, but he was also doing some side jobs, working on a pharmacist's house, like hanging up light fixtures and stuff like that. So he could have gotten it that way. He also met his girlfriend that he has now at a hospital that they worked at together 10 years ago. So he could possibly have access to him that way, or she could possibly have access to him that way, because she definitely knows a lot of people that worked at that hospital and still work at the hospital.
There are a few ways to look at the situation and not see an unsolved murder. But still, Breana's death has been recorded as an accidental overdose. The death certificate has been printed and provided to Steven Nix so he could collect on Breana's life insurance policy, which makes this sound like a case closed, even if they got it wrong. But the case isn't closed. According to authorities, this is still an active investigation. That's the reason Brittany Noojin was given when she asked for a copy of the autopsy report. But we've looked into it, and the excuse sounds fishy. In Alabama, autopsy reports are public record, whether completed by the State Department of Forensic Sciences or by the county coroner. The Blount County Coroner's website states, in cases where the cause and manner of death are not determined at the time of the autopsy, in other words, pending further investigation, copies of the autopsy, investigative and toxicology reports will usually be available a few weeks after the cause of death is determined and a death certificate is filed. This can be as long as 90 days after the death, but it is usually sooner. In cases where the cause and manner of death are certified at the time of the autopsy, investigative, and toxicology reports can take several weeks to complete, generally between 4 and 8 weeks, but it may take longer. Reports are released only after all the reports, autopsy, investigative, and toxicology, and the death certificate have been completed. From what we've heard, the cause and manner of death have been determined, the death certificate and the toxicology reports have been released. The autopsy has long been completed. We're talking about a death that occurred nearly 2 years ago.
The loophole that it seems they're leaning into here is that Alabama law says there is a possible exception where autopsy reports might not be made public if there is an ongoing criminal investigation, and that the information found during the autopsy and recorded on the autopsy report might somehow compromise this investigation. But the flaw in the process here is that, as Brittany understands it, the autopsy report has been released to Breana's husband, Steven Nix, who was listed as her next of kin. It just hasn't been released to Brittany or her family or made public. If they're trying to prevent a criminal investigation from being compromised, where's the logic in sharing the autopsy report only with the primary suspect, which is how I assume Steven would be considered if Breana's death is being investigated as a possible murder? And if the investigation is active, why hasn't Steven Nix been brought in for questioning?
It's been close to 2 years and he still has not been brought in for questioning. We created her page at the end of September, so pretty much October of 2021, really started going public and trying to get her story out there and asking the public for help, because we saw that nothing was happening. He hasn't been brought in for questioning. They haven't contacted any of the neighbors and interviewed them to see, what they might have remembered from that day. They haven't contacted the DEA and got them involved with fentanyl vials going from a hospital to someone's bedroom. You would think it's been almost 2 years, they would have at least done some of that. But now they're blaming us for creating the page as to why they can't bring him in for questioning because he's already lawyered up. Well, we just created this page a couple of months ago, so they've had all this time to bring him in for questioning and never did.
It really sounds like they're just trying to let this fade away. And in a small town like Hayden, with a good old boys police system, we're afraid that just might be exactly how this case pans out unless we spread the word as far and wide as we can, and collectively we put pressure on the authorities. Brittany Noojin and her family have hired a private investigator. And between that and the lawyer fees, her family is struggling, but continues to give everything they have to the cause of justice for Breana.
We are having to pay this private investigator to come and do what should have already been done. So it's really not fair to us because, we didn't ask for this. We've had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to try to get answers. We wouldn't be paying all this money if we did feel that she could have done this to herself. We wouldn't be going to this extreme by putting everything out there for everyone to hear. But we know that she didn't, so it's worth it to me.
If the Noojin family and their private investigator can see the autopsy reports, they will have the data they need to back up their demand for an actual criminal investigation, wherein Steven Nix is examined as a suspect. You might wonder about whether the family can arrange to have their own autopsy performed. That can be done, but it is an incredibly expensive process, starting around $30,000, and the Noojin family simply can't afford to make that happen.
We can't see this situation any other way than as a total injustice. And this is why we wanted to share this story with you today and why we think you should share this episode and Breana's story with everyone you know. More eyes and ears on this case can only help bring it to a resolution. If anyone out there listening is involved in the police force or the FBI and has any influence on what goes down at the Hayden Police Department, please bring this to their attention.
The more we share her story, the better chance we have of someone out there being able to help us. I mean, even if it's, FBI or DEA, somebody.
If you knew Breana in any capacity and can give any information to the Hayden Police Department that would aid in their investigation, please do. This includes friends who knew Breana has never used drugs or would never end her own life. It includes coworkers or superiors who worked with Breana at the hospital and can attest to the fact that she didn't seem to be using drugs and that her behavior didn't seem out of the ordinary in the days leading up to her death. Any ex-girlfriends of Steven Nix who saw his behavior maybe as controlling or abusive. If you're Breana's therapist and you have any information about Breana's mental health or about her relationship with Steven that might shed some light on the case. If you're a doctor who knows Breana's recent medical history and could prove whether she was using drugs or any other info that might be helpful to the investigation, anyone who knows anything that might be of any help, please reach out. The best way to get in touch with Breana's sister Brittany and to stay in the loop about Breana's case is to join the Facebook group Brittany created called Justice for Breana Noojin Nix. We will link to that Facebook group in today's episode details.
If you are not connected to Breana or Steven in any way, but you would still like to help, here's how. There is a petition on change.org to make Breana's autopsy report public, which we urge you to sign. We will put a link to that petition in our show notes as well. When you visit change.org to sign the petition, there's an option on that page to make a donation as well, and donations are very much so appreciated. As we mentioned, the Noojin family is struggling with lawyer fees and to pay the private investigator, and they can't afford to arrange for their own autopsy in the event that they never gain access to the county coroner's report. Every little bit helps. If you can't contribute financially, it is always helpful to share this story. Invite people to the Facebook group. Share the group's link on your wall. Share a link to this episode. Send this episode to any friends you know who might be interested. Don't stop talking about this and don't let Breana's story fade away. We need to set a precedent so that small town boys club police departments don't assume they can keep getting away with this kind of thing. Not to mention husbands like Steven Nix, who shouldn't get a free pass for murder just because they're well connected.
I just finished Yellow Jackets. That's the only thing really spooky that I've watched this week. But
Ooh, you got through the finale?
Yeah.
Awesome. I really enjoyed it.
I obviously can't spoil it, but it had enough twists and turns to keep me looped for sure. I can't wait to see more.
Fine, then I'll spoil it. No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
Here's the end.
Here's exactly what happened for those of you on episode 1.
But we do want to have a little murder news party related to the show that we'll refer to as Doom Coming, based on this show kind of turning a homecoming event into something spooky. And we're thinking like 90s prom dresses, really good like Smashing Pumpkins 90s soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
And drinks.
I'm into the whole 90s soundtrack from that show, with the exception of the Seal song, which I do not love.
Oh, yeah, right.
We won't play that one.
I will sing it.
No, well, okay, we will, because we need to see this. So.
I will sing it very badly. Yeah, that was good. I did watch Search Party, which we mentioned last week. Was that this week?
I still haven't
no
started
idea
that yet. You mentioned it last week, I think. You started it last week.
Well, I watched it all in one day.
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't know if that was last week or not.
That was last week.
Yeah, that must have been last week then. I don't know that I watched anything. I watched lots of things. I watched American Horror Story, which was kind of mediocre, like the new season.
The latest season?
The latest season.
I haven't seen it. I need to get in there sometime because I've seen all the other ones, but...
Yeah. And then...
But you didn't love it?
I did not love it. And I know there's like quite a few new things out on Netflix, like in this past week. Like there's something 81, the one that you posted. Archive 81.
Archive 81, yeah.
But that's with Aurora.
So that's a horror series that apparently is the best in a long time. So that's something I'm looking forward to for sure.
Yeah, I started the first episode and it was like a little bit slow. And I was actually watching it with my friend, Fanny, and she did not like it. So we turned it off after 30 minutes because we have a rule if either one of us is watching something, we can like at any time veto it and say, I'm bored, I want to watch something else. So we switched to something else because she wasn't into it. But then I saw your post in our Facebook group about how it gets into cults and all these other strange things. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm definitely coming back to that.
Yeah, I think the article I shared said something about a slow start, but like the later episodes get really, really good. So I hope that's true. I hope we're not just leading you all into this boring, slow series. Go check it out.
Yeah, we'll check back in next week.
Yeah. Another thing I'm really excited about is on February 3rd, that series that I posted about called Welcome to Murderville is coming. So that's like a sort of improvised show with comedians pretending that they're solving a murder. So that sounds fun.
That sounds great. And you posted it, and then I looked it up because it's hosted by Will Arnett from Arrested Development, who's great. And then I was looking at some of the celebrity guests, and Annie Murphy from Schitt's Creek, who plays Alexis, who's one of my all-time favorite characters ever, is going to be on it.
I hope she's like in that style of character, I guess, for the episode. That would be interesting.
I hope so
I'd like to see Alexis solve a murder.
I would love to see Alexis solve a murder. And I think one of the great things is like when you watch her in interviews and such, like she's much more poised, much less chatty, much less like silly than as Alexis, but there's still Alexis. You know, she still is Alexis, and you still get some of the mannerisms and stuff. So it'll just be great. I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah.
It's not quite true crime TV, but I've been listening to Sweet Bobby. That was recommended by one of the Montreal Murderinos, which is how we met and how we met a lot of our Montreal friends through a true crime group, Brandy. And it's a catfishing story. And it's about a woman in the UK who was catfished for 10 years by a man claiming to be somebody she knew, like through like a group of friends. And and this man was like kind of like in the same community, like her group of friends, whatever. Like they weren't like close, but she had seen him before, and she even like saw him out once while this was going on. And like he was really drunk when she saw him, and like was like, "Who are you?" and kind of like was weird to her. And so like it was like this big red flag, but she dismissed it as like, "Oh, he's been drinking, and like, you know, maybe it's weird that we've been having an online only relationship, so like, you know, maybe he felt weird about it." So the relationship continued, and the story kept getting wilder and wilder, and his excuses about why he couldn't come see her and why they couldn't talk on the phone and all of this stuff. So they dated for 10 years in an online-only relationship.
10 years is so extreme and so sad. Oh my gosh. I love a good catfishing story. I definitely will tune into that.
It's really good. I love catfishing stories too. One of my friends in Los Angeles used to do casting for the show Catfish on MTV. And hearing his stories about, he was a producer. It's like it was his job to work with psychologists to see if the people coming on the show were in a stable enough place to come on the show. Because, with some of the episodes of Catfishing on MTV, like some of it is because maybe somebody was gay and they're in a small town and they didn't feel comfortable interacting with
being
people
themselves.
And admitting that they were gay because there would have been repercussions. And so they were kind of testing the waters as a catfish. And so then it's like, well, how is this person going to react to finding out that it's actually me and I'm gay and I've been talking to them? And they would be worried about them.
Yeah. Sometimes there's violence in these things. We've seen that happen with older cases too. I remember that one where the guy came out as gay on Sally Jesse Raphael's show.
The Jenny Jones,
and then, maybe it was,
I can't remember.
Yeah, Jenny Jones. That was the one. Yeah. Right. I think you're right. And then the other guy murdered him.
Right.
Like he was just so put off by that and clearly not stable.
Exactly. And that's such a good example of like why those situations can be so dangerous. So it was my friend's job to like work with psychologists and make sure that people coming on the show like could handle this stress. Like hearing some of like the people that couldn't come on the show and like some of the other like behind the scenes situations was so interesting. Like I love that show. I thought it was really
imagine.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely go check out that podcast. It's really good. I won't spoil anything, but the reveal on who it is shocking.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you disagree, you can always find us on the OG murdermurder.news for the latest breaking true crime news every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at murdermurdernews, on Twitter at murdernews, where you can find lots of retweets from our favorite Darkcast podcasts. So if you want to find and follow them, start by finding us on Twitter first and then them, but us first. You can also find us on TikTok at murdernews, where this week we talked about serial killer Albert Fish, who was executed 86 years ago last Sunday. And man, that's like a case that I've always been like loosely familiar with, and it's like hearing it is always different than like researching it yourself. And we only had like 3 minutes to share his story, but wow, is it just so much more messed up than I ever knew. Like what a son of a bitch.
Yeah, for sure. And that one we'll be talking about some more on Picnic as well. So if you want to find us on the Picnic app, we'll post a link, I guess, in today's episode notes as well, just in case you haven't already found it, of how to join Picnic through our link. And then you can find us there and we will continue the conversation.
And you can also find us on Facebook just by searching for Murder News. You'll find our page there.
And while you're on Facebook searching for Murder News, you will also see our group pop up. We've just made our nominations for our book club's next selection, so if you want to read along with us and hang out with us on Zoom on the last Sunday of every month to chat about the books we've read, you will want to make sure you join that group to stay in the loop.
Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on your podcast platform of your choice. Rating and reviews help our new fans find our show and let us know which parts of our show you like the best so we can keep our podcast episodes tailored to you with the stories you want to hear.
And if you hate the show, nobody's making you listen. Just go away.
Yeah.
That's all. All right. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great week. We'll see you next Friday. Bye.
Bye, friends.